This episode is brought to you by my friend Rebecca Walser, a financial expert who can help you protect your wealth. Book your free call with her team by going to friendofdinesh.com. That's friendofdinesh.com. Coming up, Trump's going to be in court today, but I'm going to start by talking about Biden and answer his question, where's the money? Now, I'm going to look at the Trump case, and I'm going to ask which foreign adversary benefited from Trump's so-called willful mishandling of national security documents. And Tim Ballard, founder of Operation Underground Railroad, joins me. He's going to talk about the new movie Sound of Freedom based on his life story. If you're watching on Rumble or listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to the podcast. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Show.
Needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Podcast.
Donald Trump will be in a courthouse in Florida today. This is the classified documents case. It's probably going to be quite a circus. I know that there were a couple of reports that the Trump people themselves are a little afraid. People might get out of hand. They might get all worked up. Who knows what's going to happen? But, and I'll have a good deal to say about this Trump arraignment. But I want to start by sort of articulating the question on everybody's mind. We have all this stuff going on with Trump. Well, what about Biden? Not only what about Biden with regard to the classified documents? That's obvious. Why isn't that case going forward? What's the progress there? What is it that Trump has done that Biden didn't do? And how are these cases somehow distinguishable? But number two, there's all this evidence coming out of the massive ring of corruption set up, not by Hunter Biden, set up by Joe Biden, involving Hunter Biden. Now, the latest on this is Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa has announced on the Senate floor that he's got a foreign national who has been the guy who's been bribing Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. And this guy made audio recordings of his conversations with Joe and with Hunter. So apparently there are 17 recordings in total. Of these, 15 of them were recordings of phone calls between this guy and Hunter Biden, and 2, very significantly, are with Joe Biden. Now, you may say, well, how did this guy make these recordings? Why did he make them? Why did he keep them? Well, the answer is, according to Grassley, these recordings were allegedly kept as a sort of insurance policy for the foreign national in case he got into a tight spot. In other words, in case he was somehow, the Bidens turned on him, in case they didn't deliver what they were being paid to do, he would have the audio recordings as proof. Now, the remarkable thing about this is that the FBI knew about these recordings, and yet the FBI concealed the recordings from Congress. So when Congress, the Oversight Committee, requested this, and not just requested, demanded this so-called Form 1023, it's the form that describes the investigation related to this foreign national, an investigation that was brought to the attention of the Oversight Committee through a whistleblower. When they asked the FBI for the form, the FBI didn't, they said, oh yeah, well, here it is. But they redacted large parts of these documents, and they made no mention of the audio recordings. And so this means that Representative Comer and the House, Grassley in the Senate are pretty furious. They say, in effect, well, this is Grassley. He goes, the FBI made Congress review a redacted, unclassified document in a classified facility. That goes to show you the disrespect the FBI has for Congress. So you can see here the way that the FBI is actively, almost like a mafia operation, actively protecting the corruption of the Bidens. It's quite naked what they're doing, really, and the House and the Senate are both now aware of this. Now, what was Biden being bribed to do? Well, he was being bribed by the head of Burisma. So the foreign national here that I've alluded to has a name, The Washington Examiner revealed his name. It's Mykola Zlochevsky. He's the Ukrainian owner of Burisma. Now, apparently, Burisma was under investigation for corruption by a prosecutor. The prosecutor's name was Shokin. And Burisma wanted to get out of this investigation, and so they were bribing the Bidens to use Joe Biden's influence with Ukraine to basically get this prosecutor withdrawn, which is exactly what happened. And Joe Biden is on tape. You've probably seen the tape or heard the tape, bragging about how he got this prosecutor, Shokin, fired. The other thing that's interesting is that this guy, Zlochevsky, the owner of Burisma, he calls Joe Biden the big guy. Now, remember, Joe Biden was separately referred to as the big guy by a Hunter Biden business associate who called him the big guy. So evidently, this was known on both sides of the aisle. In other words, the Biden people were calling Joe Biden the big guy, and the Ukrainians, the Burisma people, were calling Joe Biden the big guy. The other thing that's significant is that this guy Zlochevsky says that he put the money that he was paying, the millions of dollars, I believe it was $5 million to Joe Biden and $5 million to Hunter Biden. This money was put into 10 separate bank accounts. Why? Because he wanted the bribery scheme to be so complicated. He said, I don't think that this bribery scheme can be unraveled for at least 10 years. In other words, people may find out about it someday, but then it's going to be too late. The Bidens will already be out of office. The deed will have been done. They will have cashed out the money. There's not probably a whole lot that can be done to them then. So this is all highly significant, and I think this is straight out impeachment material. I think probably what the House Oversight Committee is doing is trying to get this to a level of clarity in which they can go to Kevin McCarthy and say, listen, we have crossed the Rubicon. It's time to begin impeachment proceedings. In fact, I say that they should have begun yesterday. I think when it comes to towels, nothing compares to MyPillow towels. Mike Lindell has really hit a home run with his towels. Imagine having towels that actually dry you and work. And the MyPillow towels are soft to the touch without the lotiony feel. They have proprietary technology, which makes them highly absorbent. The towels feel good, but they don't really absorb. MyPillow towels are available in multiple styles and sizes. They're made with 100% USA cotton. They're machine washable and dryable. They're also 10-year warranty, 60-day money-back guarantee. And Mike is running a flash sale on these My Towels. 6-piece set for $25 with promo code Dinesh. The towels are regularly $99.98. So an amazing offer, which includes 2 bath towels, 2 hand towels, and 2 washcloths. So take advantage. Go ahead and call 800-876-0227. The number again, 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. Don't forget to use the promo code DINESH Dinesh. Donald Trump is in court today, and I'm struck by something that I saw yesterday Kash Patel say on social media, on one of these, I think he might have been on with Don Jr. Anyway, he says, quote, "This is going to be the most publicized trial in world history. And we have to be able to use that process, not to dismiss the case right away, but to show the American people the prosecutorial corruption they're engaged in." Now, this is actually strategic thinking. And by that, I mean, we might all wish, oh, well, you know what, it'd be really great if the judge, Eileen Cannon, takes a look at this indictment and goes, this is ridiculous, dismissed. Case ended. But Kash Patel is saying that actually may not be the best thing to happen. Why? Because these people have now played their hand, and they've overplayed their hand. And we need the American people to see close up the lengths to which they will go, the way that they falsify evidence, the way in which they twist words, the way in which they take inapplicable statutes and try to stick them onto things that you did, the way in which they take a Presidential Records Act, which has no criminal penalties, and try to sort of infuse criminality into something that's not criminal at all, the way in which they make a big hoopla, there's defense threats to the country, then you look and you go, what defense threat? What are you actually talking about? So let's go into some of that and see what we're actually talking about. Now, first of all, the The question is, did Trump make any money off of any of this? I've been talking about how Biden made money in China, made money in Ukraine. He's collecting bribes. Did Trump actually sell anything? Answer, no. So, in fact, it's kind of funny. Biden goes, well, where's the money? This isn't, by the way, not the way an innocent person talks, right? Where's the money? Well, he's almost taunting people to find the money. And I found the money. I can tell you where the money is. Just take the added net worth of Biden's family, which is to say Jim Biden, Frank Biden, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, add it up. It's tens of millions of dollars. And then you ask, how do they make that money? What is their business? What do they do? And the answer is nothing. Joe Biden is basically a political guy. He's been getting a government salary. And all these other guys have no talent at all. They have no capabilities. They have no capabilities in these areas in which they are supposedly making money. So it's very obvious when you look at the money is all being paid for access to Joe Biden. And that's how he owns multiple homes. That's how he owns all this. He lives this life of extreme luxury. They all do. And there's no way to account for it. Now, with the Clintons, at least you could say, well, Bill Clinton's making big speaking fees, and that's where he got some of the money. It still doesn't explain how the Clintons got to $100 million. They, too, are running a racket exactly like the Bidens. So this has now become, you could almost call it a democratic formula that operates with one variation or another. Let's turn to Trump. The first question about Trump is that he is accused of holding on to these documents and not turning them over. So you might think that the focus of the case of Trump would be, hey, listen, we're not talking about how you got the documents because a lot of other people took documents. Obama took documents. Biden took documents. We're going to try to distinguish your case from Biden's by focusing on the fact that we were in contact with you. The FBI was in contact with you. There was a subpoena issued for these documents in May of 2022, and you still held on to them. So that would be an attempt to sort of separate out Trump's case. But guess what? When you look at all these so-called espionage counts in the indictment, it turns out that they're accusing Trump of holding these documents, quote, willfully since when? Not May of 2022 when the subpoena was visited, not June when the FBI counterterrorism guy came over to Mar-a-Lago, but really from January 20th, 2021. So Trump is accused of willfully keeping these documents since the day he left office. Very interesting. Now, what are these defense documents? Well, I can tell you at least about a couple of them. Two of them that are supposedly dealing with nuclear secrets. Let's look at what these nuclear secrets are. I'm going to talk about two. Number one, letter from Obama to Trump telling him that North Korea's nuclear status is, quote, a grave national security threat. Big deal. I have a letter from Obama telling me that North Korea is a problem. They've got nuclear weapons, you know. Yeah, Captain, this is like an exercise in obviousology. And supposedly this was a grave national secret that Trump was holding on to. But let's look at the second one. Quote, letter from Chairman Kim noting no intent to use North Korean nukes offensively. Kim writes Trump because I have no intention of using these nukes in an offensive way. They're for defensive purposes. U.S. national security is gravely threatened by Trump hanging on to this. This sounds to me almost like a memento. This is the kind of thing that you'd like to keep. Big deal. There's absolutely nothing here that we don't know. There's nothing here that is surprising in the slightest. There are no nuclear secrets here. So this gives you an idea of the laughable level that we are dealing with here. You know, right before Trump left, he declassified a bunch of documents that dealt with Crossfire Hurricane, the effort to secretly tape him, to frame him. And I think that he held on to some of these documents, including those documents. Why? Because he figured that who knows what's going to happen to those documents if I leave them behind. I want to have with me proof that there was this massive ring of illegal spying and the police agencies of government were part of that, as they were. And I think that a lot of this is now a revenge and a cover-up for that. They're trying to cover up the fact that they spied illegally on Trump, and they're doing it now by trying to say, oh, Trump had documents that he was not entitled to have in his possession. Debbie and I are eating a lot better now. We've lost weight, but foods we can't seem to eat enough of, and it's a requirement, are veggies and fiber. Now, there's no better way to get all your fruits and veggies plus fiber than with Balance of Nature. Balance of Nature Fiber and Spice right here is a proprietary blend of 12 spices for digestive health. The intense flavors and deep colors of spices are the most condensed whole food source of phytonutrition available. It's recommended to be paired with the star product, fruits and veggies in a capsule, so easy. Select the whole health system for the best price. Start your journey to better health right now. Take advantage of Balance of Nature's great offer, $25 off plus free fiber and spice with your first preferred order of fruits and veggies when you use discount code AMERICA. The offer can end at any time, so act now. Call 800-246-8751. That's 800-246-8751, or go to balanceofnature.com. Use discount code AMERICA. I'll have more to say about the Trump indictment itself as the process goes forward. I want to slightly pivot and talk about the way in which GOP presidential hopefuls are reacting to the Trump indictment and the Trump arraignment. Now, I mentioned yesterday that Chris Christie has been talking about how Trump is at fault here. Chris Christie actually did, even after the podcast that I did yesterday, he was on CNN in his town hall, and he sort of tries to lay out in a sort of systematic way the case against Trump. Now, the significant thing when I hear these kinds of things is I listen to what they say, but I also listen to what they leave out. And very often what is left out is as significant, if not more significant, than the things that are mentioned. Why? Because after all, you need both to figure out the full context. It's kind of like Trump's in possession of classified documents, but you don't mention that Biden is too. Well, if Biden is too, then the question becomes why Trump and not Biden? Why aren't we going after all the presidents who are alive today, asking which of them had classified documents and at what time, and did they willfully take those documents? And if so, why aren't they being prosecuted? Why aren't we prosecuting all our ex-presidents? Well, the answer is Trump is being singled out. No mention of that by Chris Christie. And then, of course, the loser Asa Hutchinson, who's basically trying to get to 1% in the polls. This guy probably figures that, hey, if Trump is somehow sunk, so he's like, I'm calling on Donald Trump to withdraw. Of course, no one's really listening. But interestingly, more recently, we see that both Tim Scott and Nikki Haley seem to be moving in a direction a little more hostile to Trump. Now, they're moving in a qualified way, and I think partly they're doing this because they're afraid of the GOP base. They're afraid that the GOP base is actually very defensive and very protective of Trump and sees through this case. So let's start with Tim Scott. He was on with Harris Faulkner on Fox, and he actually bombarded the Justice Department. He's like, this is a weaponized system. He goes that there are two standards of justice here. We can't have one standard for Republicans, one standard for Democrats. All of this is just fine. But then later, he goes on to say that the allegations against Trump are, quote, it's a serious case with serious allegations. Now, I agree that the allegations on the face of it are serious, but it's only a serious case if these allegations are properly and fully supported and the necessary context and distinctions are made. And that's where Scott doesn't really go. And I think he doesn't really go because a little part of him sort of sees that a wounded Trump is going to be helpful to him. So what we're seeing here is political opportunism. Now, I think it's political opportunism that's kind of dumb and will actually backfire. It'll backfire because as the American public begins to see how vacant, how vaporous, how thin, how flimsy this case is, they'll then turn to Tim Scott and say, well, you said it was serious. You said that and then of course Tim Scott will backpedal and say, well, I said it was serious allegations. I didn't say that they were serious things that were proved. So this is the kind of tap dancery that we get from candidates who I think are earning our skepticism because they're not willing to, I think, call it straight. Now, Nikki Haley, she says, again, her starting point is if the allegations are true. And that's, of course, one big giant if. But she goes, if the indictment is true, Trump was, quote, incredibly reckless with our national security. Now, again, I don't see it. How was he reckless with our national security? Were there, in fact, foreign agents that got a hold of valuable material, let's say nuclear plans or strategic plans? Did they somehow end up in the hands of the Iranians or the Turks or the Chinese or even Putin? No, this is not even alleged. And so when Nikki Haley then sort of draws herself up to full height, she goes, more than that, I'm a military spouse. My husband is about to deploy this weekend. This puts all our military men and women in danger, blah, blah, blah. No, it doesn't. How does it put your husband in danger? How does it put any of our military in danger? It's not enough to say these kinds of things. You actually have to show them. And we're not getting any of this so far. So it seems to me that this is nothing more than these sort of second-tier candidates trying to jump out of the sort of low tiers of the ratings. I mean, they must look at their poll ratings and go, 4%. This is really depressing. I thought I was amazingly popular. And so they're now looking to break out of that. And it's an understandable impulse, but this is the wrong way to go about it. If aches and pains are your problem, Relief Factor is your solution. Debbie and I started taking Relief Factor a couple of years ago. The difference we've seen in our joints, nothing short of amazing. Aches and pains are totally gone thanks to this 100% drug-free solution called Relief Factor. Now, how does it work? Relief Factor supports your body's fight against inflammation. That's the source of aches and pains. The vast majority of people who try Relief Factor order more because it works for them. Debbie's a true believer. She can now do the exercises that for a long time she wasn't able to do. So Relief Factor has been a big game changer for her, her aunt, other members of our family, Mike here in the studio, and for many other people. You too can benefit. Try it for yourself. Order the 3-week quick start for the discounted price of just $19.95. Go to relieffactor.com or call 800-4RELIEF to find out more about this offer. The number again, 800-4RELIEF, or go to relieffactor.com. Feel the difference. We have had scandals in American history, and we have had false alarms, and we have had catastrophes that were badly mishandled by the authorities. And usually there's an attempt to learn some lessons out of it. So let's take, for example, the Vietnam War resulted in the War Powers Resolution, which basically said, let's be very careful before we get in these military adventures. Watergate caused Congress to pass all kinds of laws, including the Freedom of Information Act. Iran-Contra resulted in some new restrictions on the government, the Johnstown flood. Now, the point I want to make here is that COVID seems to be the opposite, because anyone who looks back at COVID, and let's be, charitable about motives here. Let's just say that this pandemic came out of nowhere. No one quite knew the extent of the damage. And so there were all kinds of restrictions that were imposed that were very draconian. And now that we look back on it, we see that a lot of the propaganda was false. A lot of people were censored for saying things that were not false, but true. They imposed restrictions that turned out to be meaningless. And so you're censoring people for saying things that are now known to be accurate. And that is that masks have very limited effectiveness, that you stick a piece of cloth in your face and it doesn't really prevent a germ from getting in or getting out. Or take the vaccine. The vaccine doesn't prevent you from getting COVID. It doesn't prevent you from transmitting COVID. So if we had known all those things before, presumably we wouldn't have had this kind of a totalitarian, tyrannical, overzealous, whatever you want to call it, response to COVID. So you might expect that the authorities in the United States and abroad would be going, let's learn some valuable lessons here about governmental overreach, about jumping to conclusions, about making claims about science that are not actually supported by science. But no, interestingly, you see efforts all across the government to strengthen the authority of government so government can act even more arbitrarily the next time. There is a group that's called the Uniform Law Commission, ULC. And this is kind of one of those sort of shadowy groups. And its job appears to be something that's fairly innocent, which is, hey, listen, we have state laws on different matters, and they often are out of sync with each other, or they're contradictory. And so something is a crime over here, but not a crime over there. It's treated it is a crime in both places, but treated one way over here, another way over there. What about if we try to make an effort to get these state laws to be somewhat more consistent or harmonious with one another? Because after all, we all live in the same country. But this group that has this kind of a seemingly innocuous job is apparently pushing aggressively for something called the Model Public Health Emergency Authority Act. And what is that? That's basically an act which says that executive authority, both at the state level and the federal level, should be unleashed to the extreme when there is any kind of a pandemic or emergency. And it is the executive officials themselves who get to say what is a pandemic and what is an emergency. So think about it this way. Right now, we have separation of powers. We have balance of power. So at the state level, it means that the governor has authority, but not unlimited authority. It's the authority that he gets from the state legislature. But imagine if the governor has the right to say, I don't care what the state legislature thinks. I can act unilaterally because it's a pandemic. I can act unilaterally because it's an emergency. And the emergency can be a climate emergency. Oh, there's a fog over New York. It's coming from Canada. And even though we know that was really arson, nevertheless, I'm going to declare that it's an emergency because of climate change. And so I'm going to prevent people from getting out of their homes. I'm going to prevent people from using a gas stove. I'm going to prevent people from driving a car that has gas or oil in it. I mean, this is preposterous. And yet, it's a very, as I say, the opposite lesson that we should be learning from COVID. We should be learning to be cautious about the overuse and misuse of government power. Instead, what these groups are pushing for, and now you can kind of see their agenda. For them, COVID had a silver lining, and the silver lining is it gives government the chance to do things that are not even really directly related. We want to forgive student loans. Okay, well, let's use COVID to do that. We want to protect renters and make it so they don't really have to pay their rent. Well, let's make it so that landlords can't evict tenants, even tenants who don't pay their rent. So here you have government pushing a progressive agenda that otherwise would take legislative action, that otherwise would have to operate through the normal channels. So you use these abnormal channels, you use epidemics, you use the politics of fear, and you use it in a way that gives you more and greater government control. So the net effect, if this kind of if this group called the ULC, the Uniform Law Commission, has its way, then you basically increase the authority of Biden, which we don't want to do, but you also increase the unilateral authority of governors. And again, look, there are a lot of Republican governors. Governors should have executive authority, but that authority is not unlimited. It's limited by what the legislature has empowered these governors to do. Governors, after all, are the executive branch carrying out the will of the legislature. So I am most certainly not in favor of upsetting the balance of powers in this way, particularly on emergencies and epidemics that may very often turn out to be, as COVID did, a pretext for doing things that you otherwise are not able to do. We are in the most vulnerable times in U.S. history with our markets and economy, and that calls for an expert financial advisor for your investments. Yet most Americans are with the conventional right out the dips in the market, formulaic advisors that have kept recycling the same old advice since the 1980s. That advice is no longer relevant. It will fail you today. And luckily, my friend Rebecca Walser, you've seen her on the podcast, she's got a great grasp both of the global economy and the U.S. economy. She's different. She's a tax attorney. She's a wealth strategist. She has her global MBA from the London School of Economics. She has seen what is coming and protected her clients back at the end of 2021. And she can do the same for you now. Debbie and I just did a call with Rebecca's team to talk about our investments, and we're moving ahead. Join us. Go to friendofdinesh.com to book a call with Rebecca Walser's team today. That's friendofdinesh.com to secure your investments and your future. Guys, I'm really happy to welcome to the podcast Tim Ballard. He's the founder of Operation Underground Railroad, and his life story is now a remarkable new film called Sound of Freedom. By the way, you can go to the website soundoffreedommovie.com. By way of background, Tim Ballard spent more than a decade working as a special agent for the Department of Homeland Security, where he was assigned to the Internet Crimes Against Children, the ICAC task force, and he was deployed as an undercover operative for the U.S. Child Sex Tourism Jump Team. He's now part of Rescuing Children as a founder and head of Operation Underground Railroad. Tim, welcome to the podcast. I mean, what an experience. You joined the Department of Homeland Security. Talk a little bit about when you first became alerted to the fact that something very wrong was going on.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, so I got into Homeland Security investigations. I was sent to do more money laundering and some terrorism cases. And in the early 2000s, we weren't talking about human trafficking. No one knew how big it was. And then they asked me to get into the internet crimes against children. So this was kind of end users. That's how it began. We started catching these guys downloading material of children being raped, and most of the footage we were seeing and seizing was from overseas. And then in 2006, George W. Bush signed into law the Adam Walsh Child Protect Act, and that did something really unique. That it eliminated a previous statutory requirement that an American sex tourist, if they're going to leave the country to go overseas and engage in sexual activity with a child, that they had to, before 2006, they had to have that intent and idea, and you had to prove that they had that intent while standing on U.S. soil. That was eliminated with the passage in 2006, and so that opened the doors for us to really go in. And I speak Spanish, and so they sent me as an undercover operator. They trained me up that way, and then that's when things really, to answer your question, blew my mind, because now it was time we could actually start seeing the kids, from the videos. And I didn't realize until I got to these developing countries how easy it is to access them. So that was the opening.
And so what you're saying is that there has been, evidently for a while, right? Because this precedes the early 2000s. Who knows when all of this got started? But you're saying that in other countries, there are large numbers of children who are apparently made available to Western and maybe specifically American tourists who go to these countries to have sex with them.
Absolutely. People don't realize here in America, we like to sit back and think, oh, this stuff's happening far, far away from me. But what people don't realize is we are the number one consumer of child rape videos almost every year. We're also in the top 3 for destination countries for human trafficking. I spent 10 years of my 12 in the government on the border. And, I can tell you how why we're number 3 in destination countries is largely due to the Biden-Harris disastrous policies on the border that is facilitating human trafficking. And so we are the problem. And when we go overseas, foreign governments, they like to use us as undercover operators because we are Western-looking people, are what traffickers in foreign countries are looking to service. So we have great success in infiltrating those criminal organizations.
Now, what happened with, was this a case where the Department of Homeland Security was fully behind you in your efforts, or were you being somehow restricted or blocked in any way?
So what happens is they would send me overseas, and you know how bureaucracy is a difficult thing anywhere. And I don't blame any of the agents or even my direct bosses. It's more the system, the bureaucratic system that ties everybody's hands. But they would send me over as part of, they created something called the Sex Tourism Jump Team. And that was the team that went overseas looking for Americans who were abusing children. The problem is, they give you a week, 2 weeks max, and we'd always find the kids. But if I couldn't find that nexus back to the US, in other words, if I didn't show up undercover at the same time, same place that the American was going to be there, and so I made the argument like, well, let us stay here, let's rescue these kids, and then we'll go back. We'll get digital, we'll get computers, we'll seize stuff, and then find the Americans. And that was too creative for a giant bureaucracy. And so what happened in 2014, I had been pulled back so many times, it was breaking my heart. It was like, I'd make myself the bait in an operation and then have to leave. And in 2014, I was sent down to Colombia and Haiti. There's 2 different cases. The film just focuses on one, where I got myself really involved, really neck deep. And then they said, come home. And I said, I'm done. I'm not coming home. I can't do this again. I got too involved. And so I just took the leap of faith. My wife and I just said, well, let's just see what's going to happen. God will protect us, somehow figure out how to feed our family. And so that's the story of Sound of Freedom. Is I quit to finish the case. And it ended up being one of the largest rescue operations ever recorded. And that's the basis for Sound of Freedom.
Now, describe Operation Underground Railroad. You quit the government. You decided that their bureaucratic strategy, hey, send this guy over for 2 weeks, and then you have to abandon the project or at least pull back from it, perhaps at the very time when you're about to make a breakthrough. What are you now able to do in the private sphere through Operation Underground Railroad that you couldn't do before? Talk a little bit about the success or effectiveness of your mission now.
Yeah, thank you. So it's if you privatize something, it always is bad. It always does the job a little better, I feel, just because you don't have those restraints. And I run two organizations. One's Operation Underground Railroad. The other one was founded by Glenn Beck in 2014. It's called the Nazarene Fund. It focuses on persecuted Christians and religious minorities. It does similar work. I run the Nazarene Fund. I'm the founder of OUR. So, but what we can do here is we can move in ways the government just can't move. I mean, I remember having to get 5 people to sign off just to get on a plane and fly to a foreign country, to be able to just to have a lead or an inkling and just jump on a plane and go. For example, just last year, we went to Ukraine to help orphans who were in the war zone. We ended up rescuing all these kids there, getting them out of the war zone. And while we were there, we found this Dutch ring of pedophiles who were trying to traffic children out of Ukraine. And so we tracked them. They were in Holland, they were in Mexico, they were in Ecuador. So, and there's a docuseries coming out called The Hidden Wars. It's produced by Tony Robbins. That's going to tell this whole story. But the point is, I mean, I could spend 2 hours telling the story. It's crazy. But we blew through 6 countries, 3 continents, rescued hundreds, maybe thousands in preventative rescues, took down an entire pedophile ring, all in 4 months. I would never be able to do that with the bureaucratic restraints, because we get a lead, we're on a plane to Mexico, then we're here, then we're there. These guys were heading into Miami. We caught them going into Miami. But we work with governments because we don't have the badge. We provide the really good cases and intel to them, but we can coordinate with 6 countries at the same time in ways that they're not able. So we basically are a force multiplier. We support law enforcement. We don't replace law enforcement. So we're like the red phone, the bat phone that they can pick up and say, I have a bureaucratic problem. I need $2,000, or I need a plane ticket, or I need this. I need to help move this survivor, and we're on it. So we work very well with my former agency, Homeland Security Investigations. We're very close partners with them.
Terrific. Let's take a pause. When we come back, more with Tim Ballard, founder of Operation Underground Railroad. And basically his life story is the focus of the film Sound of Freedom, which is now out. The website, soundoffreedommovie.com. Guys, I'd like to invite you to check out my Locals channel. I post lots of exclusive content there, including content that's censored on other social media platforms. On Locals, you get Dinesh Unchained, Dinesh Uncensored. You can also interact with me directly. I do a lively weekly Q&A every Tuesday. No topic is off limits. I've also uploaded some very cool films to Locals, both documentaries and feature films, my films, and also films by other independent producers. 2000 Mules is up there, and I'm doing a new big film this year. I'll be giving you the inside scoop as we get closer on Locals. And if you're an annual subscriber, you can stream and watch all these films for free. So check out my channel at dinesh.locals.com. I'd love to have you along for this great ride. Again, it's dinesh.locals.com. I'm talking with Tim Ballard, founder of Operation Underground Railroad, the movie Sound of Freedom, and the website soundoffreedommovie.com. Tim, this whole phenomenon of pedophilia, I mean, it baffles me a little bit. It was always been sort of my assumption, which may be false, that this is an extreme rarity, that you've got various kinds of sexual perversion, to be sure, in any society. But the idea of adults attracted to small children, it would seem to be something very rare, but maybe I'm completely wrong. Is this something far more widespread than the ordinary American might suspect?
It absolutely is. And I, every day, am shocked because a decent mind can't comprehend, just like you or anyone can't comprehend that there could be that many people. But the reality is there are 2 million children, 2 million. This is according to the U.S. State Department, all UN reports. 2 million children currently forced into commercial sex. If you add labor and organ harvesting, it's closer to 6 million children who are stuck in those things. But it is absolutely true. There's I mean, there's been like a 5,000% increase in child exploitation material. These are generally prepubescent children, videos of them being sexually assaulted. I mean, there's millions of those being transferred through the United States every day to pedophiles. And they're getting bold now. This is the scary thing that's happening, is they're getting bold because the culture is starting to want to decriminalize the sexualization of children. You see this in culture, in what they're giving children and calling it sex education. It's pornography. They're pornifying our kids, and now they're allowing kids to consent to mutilate their bodies and all sorts of things. Well, that's going to lead to allowing kids to consent to have sex with a 50-year-old pedophile. And now that they've sexualized the kids, by the time they're 13 and 14 years old, they're already conditioned for it. So grooming's a real thing. You know, I used to think, Dinesh, that I might be out of a job because we rescued all the kids. I now worry that I might be out of a job because this woke culture is going to decriminalize and take away all the laws that I need to protect kids. I think they're slowly chipping away at them, and children are in the crosshairs. And I'll tell you this, all the things that the godless leftists are doing to children right now in the name of liberating them, they're all the things that pedophile groups have been promoting. I'm not saying they're talking to each other. I'm just saying that pedophile groups have been around for a long time, and they have literature, they have platforms like the North American Man-Boy Love Association, or like the organization out of Holland that we took down. And it's frightening to see how their agenda is almost exactly the woke agenda, and when it comes to kids. So, you know, they're doing it for different reasons, I think. But still, if anyone is doing something that makes a pedophile salivate, like decriminalizing sex with kids or giving them pornography and calling it sex ed, if you're making pedophiles salivate, probably put a pause on what you're doing and rethink your strategy.
How pleased are you with the way in which the movie tells your story? And it must be pretty cool to have Caviezel playing the key role. Talk a little bit about the film and your feelings about. Sometimes films are, you look at it, you go, that was pretty good, but that's really not my story. Well, is it your story? Yeah,
they do a very good job. Definitely Caviezel makes me look way more of a badass than I am. I'll be honest. I feel a little bit like imposter syndrome sometimes watching the film. But I will say that all the bad guys are real. All the kids are real. All the cases are real. Like all those things happened. Those guys are sitting in jail right now, so definitely I give it like an 85% real. So I am pleased with it. I'm pleased that we have a voice now for human trafficking, that hopefully more people will wake up and we can start combating it at even a more effective way. So
absolutely. Hey guys, once again, go to soundofreedommovie.com. You can watch the trailer. The film is out. So Tim Ballard, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Dinesh.
I've been talking about how atheism is the opiate of the morally corrupt. And one version of atheism is, of course, the atheist spin on Darwinism. Now, bioethicist Peter Singer invokes Darwinism to make the point that, hey, human beings and animals aren't all that different, and therefore he says animals should get some of the rights that are now given only to humans. But he also argues that humans should be denied some of the protections that they now have on the grounds that they're not all that different from animals. So Singer goes, hey, if man is the product of evolution and not God's special creation, then the whole structure of Judeo-Christian morality doesn't really apply. We can't speak in hushed tones about the preciousness or the sanctity of life. So, hey, abortion, euthanasia, even infanticide, all become permissible in some situations, even desirable. So in Singer's work, we see echoes of Darwin, echoes of Nietzsche, and Darwin becomes the weapon to strike down Christian belief and clear the ground for a kind of Nietzschean immoralism. In a now notorious article in the New York Times, Steven Pinker, a cognitive psychologist at Harvard, says, hey, the logic of evolution tells us why it's not that big of a deal for mothers to kill their newborn children. He's not just talking about abortion, he's talking about children already born. And Pinker basically says there were some disturbing news reports about a teenage girl who gave birth to a baby at a school dance and then just dumped the newborn in the trash. And Pinker was like, we shouldn't be too outraged about this because this can actually be explained by Darwinism. And so he sought to reassure the American public, saying, quote, a capacity for neonaticide is built into the biological design of our parental emotions. And the problem with Homo sapiens may not be, he writes, that we have too little morality. The problem may be that we have too much. So think of the kind of gross and barbaric practices here that are being defended. Defended why? Defended on the basis that, hey, Christian morality doesn't apply, and therefore, in a sense, anything or close to anything goes. Now, Pinker is right to a certain extent. He's right that abortion and infanticide are actually fairly common in world history, both in the past and if we go across the world today. The reason that they've been forbidden for centuries in the West is indeed because Western values were shaped by Christianity. Here's Ben Weicker. He says, quote, the laws against abortion and infanticide in the West are only intelligible as a result of its Christianization, and the repeal of those same laws is only intelligible in light of its de-Christianization. So if America were a purely secular society, if we could somehow uproot completely our Christian influence and Christian heritage, then there would be no real moral debate about child killing. And one reason Pinker and others attack Christianity so bitterly is precisely to remove its moral influence and make society more hospitable for abortion, infanticide, and euthanasia. Now, it may seem really odd for a society that is always preaching about compassion and caring, you don't care, we need more compassion, to see this kind of callousness toward human life. Seems like it's a little bit of a paradox. But I think the paradox is resolved when you see it's precisely because many people are so terrible in their private lives that they pretend to be virtuous in their public lives. People who do things that are just morally disgusting, cheating on their spouses, killing their offspring, can't really escape the pang of conscience. So what do? They deflect their conscience, not just to give other people the impression that they're kind and wonderful, but to convince themselves of the same. And so it's like a guy who's like, embezzling from his company or sleeping with his business associate, but he goes, hey, listen, I'm making a sizable contribution to women's rights, or hey, I'm making a major donation to the United Way. This sort of public philanthropy camouflages disgusting private behavior. So my conclusion is this: contrary to popular belief, atheism isn't really an intellectual revolt, it's a moral revolt. Atheists don't find God invisible so much as objectionable. And so what they don't like about God is God offers us spiritual healing, but many people don't want it. Like a supervisory parent, God gets in our way. This is the perennial appeal of atheism. It gets rid of the stern fellow with the long beard, that's God, and liberates us for the pleasures of sin and depravity. The atheist seeks to get rid of moral judgment by getting rid of the judge.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.